Eleanor Grayson sat by the window of her small room at Sunset Pines nursing home, her gnarled fingers tracing the edge of a faded photograph. The image showed her 3 children: Margaret, Thomas, and Lila, smiling at a long-ago picnic, their faces bright with youth and promise. That was before life had carved its lines into them all, before they decided she was too frail, too forgetful, too much of a burden to keep at home. At 78, Eleanor was far from the fragile shell they imagined. Her mind was sharp, her spirit fiercer than ever, and her heart, though bruised, still beat with purpose. The decision to move her here had been swift, almost clinical. Margaret, the eldest, had been the one to break the news. Her voice clipped over the phone. "It's for your safety, Mom," she'd said, as if Eleanor's life could be reduced to a checklist of risks. Thomas had nodded along during the family meeting, avoiding her gaze, while Lila, the youngest, had cried but offered no resistance. They'd packed her belongings, decades of memories stuffed into 2 suitcases, and left her in this sterile room with its beige walls and the faint smell of antiseptic. Visiting hours were set: Sundays, 2 to 4 p.m., a tidy slot for their guilt. Eleanor didn't cry when they left. She'd raised them to be independent, to make hard choices. But this choice stung like betrayal. She'd spent her life building a home for them, a legacy of love and sacrifice, only to be shelved when her steps grew slower. But Eleanor Grayson was not one to wallow. She'd survived worse: losing her husband to cancer, rebuilding their finances alone, raising 3 kids through lean years. If her children thought Sunset Pines would be her final chapter, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The nursing home itself was a paradox. The staff were kind but overworked. The residents a mix of vibrant souls and those lost to time. Eleanor quickly befriended Clara, a sprightly 82-year-old with a penchant for poker, and Harold, a quiet widower who spent his days sketching birds he'd never see again. They, like her, refused to let age define them. Over lukewarm coffee in the communal lounge, they shared stories of their lives: Clara's days as a jazz singer, Harold's time as a carpenter. Eleanor told them about her career as a real estate agent, how she'd turned a knack for negotiation into a small fortune. "I could sell sand in a desert," she'd say, and they'd laugh, believing her. But beneath the camaraderie, Eleanor felt the weight of her new reality. The rules of Sunset Pines were rigid: meals at fixed times, lights out by 10 p.m., and those visiting hours that felt more like a parole hearing. She missed her garden, her books, the freedom to live on her terms. One evening, as she watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, an idea sparked. It was audacious, borderline absurd, but it lit a fire in her chest. She wasn't just going to live here, she was going to own this place. The next morning, Eleanor requested a meeting with the home's director, Mr. Caldwell, a nervous man with a habit of adjusting his tie. She sat across from him, her posture straight, her gray eyes unwavering. "I'd like to know who owns Sunset Pines," she said. Caldwell blinked, caught off guard. "It's part of a larger corporation, Mrs. Grayson." "Why do you ask?" She smiled, the kind of smile that had closed 100 deals. "Because I'm interested in buying it." Caldwell laughed, thinking it a joke. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She'd done her research, discreetly calling old contacts from her real estate days. Sunset Pines was owned by a struggling chain, Pinnacle Care, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Their stock was plummeting, and they were desperate for a buyer. Eleanor still had her savings, carefully invested over decades, and a network of financial allies who trusted her instincts. She wasn't just a resident, she was a player in a game her children had no idea she could still play. Over the next week, Eleanor worked tirelessly, her room transforming into a makeshift office. She made calls, sent emails, and drafted proposals, her hands steady despite their tremor. Clara and Harold became her confidants, sneaking her extra coffee and cheering her on. "You're a force, Ellie," Clara said, her eyes gleaming. "Show em what we're made of." By the end of the month, Eleanor had secured a meeting with Pinnacle Cares Board. She walked into their sleek office in a tailored blazer, her silver hair swept into a bun, and laid out her offer, she'd buy Sunset Pines, keep the staff, and turn it into a model for dignified elder care. The board was skeptical, but Eleanor's numbers were solid, her vision compelling. She spoke of a home where residents had autonomy, where their voices mattered, where visiting hours weren't a privilege but a right. She painted a picture of a community, not a warehouse for the elderly. By the time she finished, the board was silent, then nodding. 2 weeks later, the deal was done. Sunset Pines was hers. Eleanor stood in the lobby of Sunset Pines, now officially hers, clutching the signed papers. The weight of the moment was surreal. She, a 78-year-old woman discarded by her own children, had just purchased the very place meant to contain her. The staff whispered in awe. The residents buzzed with excitement. But Eleanor felt a quiet resolve. Ownership was only the beginning. Now came the work of transformation. She wasn't just reclaiming her life, she was rewriting the rules for everyone here. Her first act was to call a meeting with the residents. The lounge was packed, wheelchairs and walkers lining the walls, faces etched with curiosity and skepticism. Clara sat in the front row, grinning like a co-conspirator, while Harold sketched nervously in his notebook. Eleanor stood tall, her voice clear and warm. "This isn't just a nursing home anymore," she said. "It's our home. We decide how it runs. No more rigid schedules. No more visiting hours that treat our families like strangers. We're going to make this place ours." The room erupted in murmurs, then applause. Eleanor outlined her plan: flexible meal times, activities based on residents' interests, and a council where their voices would shape decisions. She wanted gardens, art classes, music nights, things to make life vibrant again. But the boldest change was the visiting hours. "Families can come anytime," she declared. "No more 2-hour windows. This is a home, not a prison." Clara hooped, and even Harold cracked a rare smile. Implementing these changes wasn't easy. The staff, though supportive, were stretched thin, and some resisted the upheaval. Eleanor spent hours meeting with nurses, aides, and cooks, listening to their concerns and offering raises funded by her own savings until she could stabilize the budget. She hired a consultant, a sharp young woman named Rachel, who'd worked with innovative care facilities. Together, they mapped out a new schedule, trained staff on resident-centered care, and began renovations: brighter paint, cozy furniture, a garden plot where Eleanor herself planted the first roses. But the real challenge was her children. Eleanor hadn't told them about her purchase. She wanted to see their faces when they arrived for their usual Sunday slot, expecting the same sterile routine. When the day came, Margaret, Thomas, and Lila walked in, looking uncomfortable as always, their visits more duty than desire. They froze when they saw the lobby newly painted in warm yellows, with residents laughing over a puzzle and soft jazz playing. Eleanor greeted them, her smile both welcoming and defiant. "Mom, what's going on?" Margaret asked, her brow furrowed. Eleanor led them to her office, once Caldwell's. Now Herson sat them down. "I own Sunset Pines now," she said simply. Their jaws dropped. Thomas stammered. How could you afford that? Lila's eyes welled up. But Eleanor held up a hand. I've always been resourceful. You assumed I was done. But I'm just getting started. And from now on, you visit when I say or when you actually want to. The conversation was tense. Margaret argued it was reckless. Thomas questioned her health. But Lila, quieter, seemed to see the fire in her mother's eyes. Eleanor laid out her new rules: no more scheduled visits. They could come anytime, but only if they came to connect, not to check a box. I raised you to respect me, she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. Now it's time you show it. They left in stunned silence, and Eleanor felt a pang of grief but also liberation. Back in the lounge, Clara and Harold were waiting. How'd it go? Clara asked, dealing cards for their nightly poker game. Eleanor sighed, sitting down. They'll come around. Or they won't. Either way, I'm not waiting anymore. Harold slid a sketch across the tablia portrait of her, fierce and regal, standing in the garden she'd planned. This is you now, he said softly. Eleanor's eyes stung, but she smiled. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Eleanor and Rachel worked to secure grants for the home, tapping into programs for elder care innovation. Residents began forming committees. Clara led one for entertainment, organizing a jazz night that drew a small crowd from town. Harold's sketches inspired an art exhibit, and Eleanor noticed him lingering near Clara, his shyness giving way to something warmer. The home was coming alive, and so was Eleanor. But in quiet moments, she wondered if her children would ever understand what she'd done, not just for herself, but for everyone here. The garden at Sunset Pines bloomed under Eleanor's care, roses and lavender weaving a tapestry of color and scent. She often worked there in the early mornings, her hands in the soil, feeling the earth's pulse as she had in her old home. It was her sanctuary, a place to think, to plan, to heal. But today, as she pruned a thorny bush, her thoughts were on her children. 2 weeks had passed since she'd confronted them, and none had returned. The silence was louder than their arguments. Eleanor threw herself into the home's transformation to keep the ache at bay. The resident council was thriving, with Clara pushing for a weekly dance night and Harold suggesting a birdwatching club. Eleanor approved every idea, determined to make Sunset Pines a place of joy, not resignation. She also started a mentorship program, pairing residents with local high school students who volunteered for community service credits. The kids brought energy, and the residents gave wisdom stories of wars, loves, and lives well lived. One afternoon, a 16-year-old volunteer named Mia lingered after her shift, her eyes bright with curiosity. Mrs. Grayson, how did you do it? She asked. By this place. I mean, my grandma's in a home, and it's not like this. Eleanor smiled, wiping dirt from her hands. I never stopped believing I had something to offer. Mia, age doesn't erase your power, it refines it. Mia nodded, scribbling notes for a school project. Eleanor saw herself in the girl's ambition, and it stirred a longing for her own children to see her this way. The home's changes drew attention. A local newspaper ran a story on Sunset Pines, calling it a revolution in elder care. Eleanor framed the article, hanging it in the lobby, but she didn't let the praise distract her. There were still challenges: budget constraints, a few resistant staff members, and the occasional resident who preferred the old routines. She met each obstacle with patience, her real estate instincts guiding her through negotiations and compromises. Rachel, her consultant, became her right hand, marveling at Eleanor's ability to inspire. One evening, as Eleanor reviewed budgets in her office, There was a knock. It was Lila, her youngest, standing nervously in the doorway. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. Eleanor nodded, her heart racing. Lila sat, twisting her scarf in her hands. "I didn't realize how much we hurt you," she said. "I thought we were doing the right thing, putting you here. But seeing what you've done, Mom, I'm sorry." The words cracked something open in Eleanor. She reached for Lila's hand, squeezing it. "I don't need apologies. Sweetheart, I need you to see me." Lila stayed for hours, helping Eleanor sort through grant applications and laughing over old family stories. It was the first real connection they'd had in years, and Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. But Margaret and Thomas remained distant, their absence a shadow over her victory. She wondered if they were too proud, too ashamed, or simply too busy to face her. Clara, ever perceptive, noticed Eleanor's quieter moments. "They'll come," she said one night over poker, "or they'll miss out on the best damn woman they'll ever know." The next day, Eleanor launched a new initiative, Memory Circles, where residents shared their life stories with staff and volunteers. Harold went first, his voice steady as he described building his first house with his late wife. Clara followed, singing a jazz tune that brought tears to everyone's eyes. When it was Eleanor's turn, she spoke of her children not with bitterness, but with love and loss, and the fierce determination that had led her to By Sunset Pines. The room was silent, then erupted in applause. Mia, the volunteer, hugged her afterward, whispering, "You're my hero." As spring turned to summer, the home became a hub for the community. Families visited freely. Children played in the garden. And the jazz nights grew so popular that Eleanor had to borrow chairs from the local church. She felt alive, purposeful, but the rift with Margaret and Thomas gnawed at her. She wrote them letters not accusing, but inviting, asking them to see what she'd built. She mailed them, unsure if they'd respond, but certain she'd done her part. Sunset Pines was no longer a place of ending, it was a beginning. For her, and for everyone who called it home. Summer brought warmth to Sunset Pines, both in the air and in the community Eleanor had fostered. The garden was now a riot of color, with residents and volunteers tending it together. Eleanor often found herself there, teaching Mia how to prune roses or listening to Harold's quiet musings about the birds that flocked to the new feeders. The home hummed with life, laughter from dance nights, the clink of glasses at community dinners, the soft strum of a guitar from a visiting musician. But beneath the vibrancy, Eleanor carried a quiet ache. Margaret and Thomas still hadn't responded to her letters. She threw herself into new projects to keep the herd at bay. With Rachel's help, she secured a grant to install a small library, stocking it with books chosen by the residents. Clara insisted on a jazz history section, while Harold donated his birding guides. Eleanor added her own collection of novels, each one a piece of her past. The library's opening was a celebration, with Mia reading poetry and Clara leading an impromptu sing-along. Eleanor watched, her heart full yet heavy, wondering if her older children would ever see this side of her. One afternoon, a surprise visitor arrived, Thomas. He stood in the lobby, looking out of place in his crisp suit, his eyes scanning the transformed space. Eleanor approached, her pulse quickening. "Thomas," she said, keeping her voice steady. He shifted, uncomfortable. "I got your letter," he said. "I didn't know what to think. This place, it's not what I expected." Eleanor gestured to a bench in the garden. "Let's talk," she said, and he followed, hesitant but curious. They sat under the shade of a maple, the air sweet with lavender. Thomas admitted he'd been skeptical, even angry, at her purchase. I thought you were being reckless. Mom. Taking on something this big at your age. He trailed off, meeting her gaze. Eleanor's eyes were calm but fierce. Age doesn't stop ambition. Thomas. You thought I was finished, but I've got more to give. He nodded slowly, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of respect. They talked for hours about his work, her vision, the years they'd let slip. When he left, he promised to return, and Eleanor believed him. Margaret, however, remained a ghost. Lila visited weekly now, helping in the garden or joining memory circles, her bond with Eleanor growing stronger. But Margaret's silence was a wound that wouldn't heal. Eleanor confided in Clara one evening, her voice low. I thought she'd be proud, she said. She's always been the practical one. Like me. Clara shuffled her cards, her eyes sharp. Pride's a funny thing, Ellie. Sometimes it keeps people away more than anger does. To distract herself, Eleanor focused on the residents. She noticed Harold and Clara growing closer, their banter softening into something tender. One night, during a jazz event, Harold asked Clara to dance, his hands trembling but his smile wide. The room cheered, and Eleanor felt a pang of joy mixed with envy. She'd had that once with her husband, and now, watching her friends, she wondered if love could bloom again for her. But romance wasn't her priority. Her mission was the home, and the people in it. A new challenge arose. A corporate chain, Pinnacle's rival, made an offer to buy Sunset Pines back. They saw its success and wanted a piece. Eleanor met with their representative, a slick man named Mr. Vance, who underestimated her at every turn. We can take this off your hands, Mrs. Grayson, he said, smirking. You've done well, but this is a young person's game. Eleanor's smile was steel. I've outplayed men like you my whole life, she said, and sent him packing with a counteroffer so bold it left him speechless. The victory strengthened her resolve. She began planning an expansion on new wing for memory care patients, with input from residents and staff. Mia, now a regular volunteer, designed a mural for the lobby, depicting the residents' stories in vibrant colors. Eleanor watched it take shape, feeling a surge of pride. Sunset Pines wasn't just a home, it was a legacy. But as she stood alone that night, staring at the mural, she wondered if Margaret would ever see it, or if some wounds were too deep to mend. The mural in the lobby of Sunset Pines was nearly complete. A vibrant tapestry of the residents' lives, Clara's jazz notes swirling around Harold's birds, Eleanor's roses anchoring the scene. Mia, the teenage volunteer, stepped back to admire her work, paint smudged on her cheek. It's for you, Mrs. Grayson, she said, for what you've built. Eleanor's throat tightened. She hugged Mia, whispering, it's for all of us. But as she looked at the mural, she saw her children's absence in the empty spaces, especially Margaret's. Eleanor's days were a whirlwind of purpose. The memory care wing was taking shape, with architects consulting residents on every detail: soft lighting, calming colors, spaces for storytelling. She also launched a partnership with a local university, inviting students to study aging and work with residents on oral history projects. The home was no longer just a place to live, it was a hub of learning, connection, and dignity. Yet, each night, Eleanor sat alone in her office, her letters to Margaret unanswered, her heart caught between triumph and longing. One morning, Clara burst into Eleanor's office, her eyes wide. You've got a visitor, Ellie, and you're not gonna believe who. Eleanor followed her to the lobby, where Margaret stood, her posture rigid, her face a mask of uncertainty. Eleanor's breath caught. Margaret, she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. Her daughter looked around, taking in the mural, the laughter, the life. "This is incredible," Margaret said, almost to herself. "I didn't think you could do this." They moved to the garden, where Eleanor's roses bloomed fiercely. Margaret admitted she'd been angry not at Eleanor, but at herself. "I thought we were protecting you," she said, her voice breaking. "But I see now we were wrong. I was wrong." Eleanor listened, her heart aching but open. "I never wanted protection," she said. "I wanted respect. I wanted you to see me." Margaret nodded, tears falling, and for the first time in years, they embraced, the weight of their rift lifting slightly. The reconciliation was fragile but real. Margaret began visiting regularly, not out of duty but curiosity, asking about the home's operations, even offering her accounting skills to streamline the budget. Thomas, too, came more often, bringing his kids, who ran through the garden with Mia, their laughter and new music. Lila, already a fixture, organized a family day, where residents' relatives joined for games and stories. Eleanor watched her children mingle with the community she'd built, her pride tempered by the years of distance they'd all lost. But challenges persisted. The corporate chain returned with a higher offer, this time with veiled threats of legal action, claiming Eleanor's purchase had exploited Pinnacle's financial distress. She met with her lawyer, a sharp woman named Susan, who'd been a friend since her real estate days. "They're bluffing," Susan said, "but we need to be ready." Eleanor rallied the residents, sharing the threat openly. "This is our home," she told them. "We fight for it." Clara organized a petition. Harold designed flyers, and the community's resolve grew stronger. The fight drew media attention, with a national outlet picking up the story. Reporters interviewed Eleanor, Clara, and even Mia, who spoke passionately about the home's impact. "Mrs. Grayson showed me what strength looks like," Mia said on camera, her voice steady. The coverage put pressure on the corporate chain, who backed off, unable to match the public's support for Sunset Pines. Eleanor stood in the lobby as the news broke, residents cheering around her, and felt a surge of victory not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been underestimated. That night, Eleanor hosted a celebration, with Clara singing and Harold dancing with her, their joy infectious. Margaret, Thomas, and Lila were there, their faces soft with pride. As the music played, Eleanor realized she'd done more than buy a nursing home. She'd reclaimed her place in the world, and in her children's hearts. But as she looked at the stars above the garden, she knew the journey wasn't over. There were more battles to fight, more lives to touch, and she was ready. The victory over the corporate chain was a turning point for Sunset Pines. The media spotlight brought donations, volunteers, and a flood of inquiries from families seeking a place like Eleanor's for their loved ones. She used the momentum to expand the memory care wing, adding sensory rooms and a music therapy program inspired by Clara's jazz nights. The home was no longer just a local gamut, it was a beacon, a model for what elder care could be. But Eleanor knew success was fragile, and she worked tirelessly to keep it strong. Her children were now a regular presence. Margaret, once distant, took on the role of financial advisor, streamlining budgets with a precision that made Eleanor proud. Thomas brought his kids every weekend, their energy brightening the garden as they helped Harold build birdhouses. Lila, the heart of the trio, started a storytelling workshop, recording residents' memories for a podcast that gained a small but loyal following. Eleanor watched them integrate into her world, their respect for her growing with each visit. Yet, she guarded her heart, wary of expecting too much. One evening, Clara pulled Eleanor aside after a dance night, her eyes serious. "You've given us a home, Ellie, but you're carrying too much alone. Let us help more." Eleanor protested. She was used to leading, to being the rock, but Clara's words lingered. The next day, she formed an advisory board, inviting Clara, Harold, Rachel, and even Mia to join. Margaret offered to sit in, her expertise a welcome addition. The board became a space for shared dreams, with ideas like a community theater and a pen pal program with schools taking shape. But not all was smooth. A new challenge emerged when a state inspector questioned Sunset Pines' unconventional model. "Flexible visiting hours and resident councils are admirable," she said, "but they don't meet standard regulations." Eleanor felt the old fire flare. She and Susan prepared a detailed defense, citing the home's outcomes: happier residents, lower staff turnover, and community support. The residents rallied, with Clara leading a letter-writing campaign and Harold sketching a poignant cartoon of a caged bird for the local paper. The inspector relented, granting a waiver, but Eleanor knew the system wasn't built for places like hers. The fight reminded her of her own resilience, forged through years of raising children alone after her husband's death. She shared this in a memory circle, her voice steady as she described selling their first home to pay medical bills, then rebuilding her life. "I learned then that you don't wait for permission to live," she said. The residents nodded, their own stories echoing hers. Mia, now a senior, recorded the session for her college application essay, calling Eleanor the grandmother I never had. As fall approached, Eleanor planned a harvest festival, inviting the town to celebrate with the residents. The garden was strung with lights, tables groaned with food, and Clara's jazz band played under the stars. Margaret, Thomas, and Lila worked alongside volunteers, their laughter mingling with the residents. During a quiet moment, Margaret pulled Eleanor aside. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you," she said. "You're not just my mommy extraordinary." Eleanor hugged her, tears pricking her eyes. "I just wanted you to know I'm still here," she whispered. The festival was a triumph, but Eleanor's thoughts turned to the future. She began mentoring Rachel to take over daily operations, knowing she couldn't run Sunset Pines forever. Rachel, now fiercely loyal, absorbed every lesson, her admiration for Eleanor evident. Clara and Harold, now openly a couple, planned a small wedding in the garden, asking Eleanor to officiate. The idea filled her with joy to not only build a home, but a family, one that extended beyond blood. As the festival ended, Eleanor stood in the garden, watching fireflies dance. Her children were there, their faces soft in the glow, and for the first time, she felt whole. Sunset Pines was her legacy, but so was this moment, proof that love, like resilience, could bloom in the most unexpected places. She knew there'd be more challenges, but she was ready, her heart full of the home she'd made and the family she'd reclaimed. Winter settled over Sunset Pines, blanketing the garden in frost, but warming the home with community spirit. Eleanor stood at the center of it all, her silver hair catching the light as she welcomed families to the annual holiday party. The lobby glowed with decorations, paper snowflakes made by Mia's volunteer group, a tree adorned with ornaments crafted by residents. Clara and Harold, newly engaged, danced to a slow jazz tune, their smiles a testament to the home's magic. Eleanor's children were there too, helping serve hot cocoa, their presence no longer a rarity but a comfort. The advisory board was thriving, with Rachel taking on more leadership. Eleanor mentored her daily, sharing decades of wisdom about negotiation, empathy, and vision. "You've got the heart for this," Eleanor told her one snowy afternoon. "But don't let anyone underestimate you not your age." Not your gender. Nothing. Rachel nodded, her notebook filled with Eleanor's advice. The board's latest project was a wellness program, with yoga classes and nutrition workshops tailored for residents. Clara, ever the performer, led a chair dancing session that had everyone laughing. But Eleanor's thoughts often drifted to the bigger picture. Sunset Pines was a success, but she wanted its model to spread. She began writing a guidebook, documenting her approach: resident autonomy, community integration, flexible care. She enlisted Mia, now accepted to college, to help with research, and Lila to edit the manuscript. The process was slow, but Eleanor poured her soul into it, hoping to inspire other homes to rethink elder care. This isn't just about us, she told the board. It's about every person who's been written off too soon. Her children's involvement deepened. Margaret took charge of the guidebook's budget, her practicality grounding Eleanor's ambition. Thomas organized a fundraiser to publish it, his kids designing posters with Harold's guidance. Lila's podcast grew, featuring residents' stories alongside Eleanor's, and drew listeners nationwide. One evening, Thomas pulled Eleanor aside. "I used to think you needed us to take care of you," he said. "Now I see you're teaching us how to live." Eleanor's eyes stung, but she smiled. "I just needed you to listen." A new challenge loomed, a proposed state law that would tighten nursing home regulations, threatening Sunset Pines' flexible model. Eleanor rallied the community, organizing a trip to the state capitol. Residents, staff, and volunteers filled a bus, with Clara leading protest songs and Harold sketching the scene. Eleanor spoke at the hearing, her voice steady as she described the home's impact: lower hospital readmissions, higher resident satisfaction, a model that worked. Mia, standing beside her, shared her own story, calling Sunset Pines a place where age doesn't define you. The lawmakers listened, and the law was amended to allow exceptions for innovative homes. The victory was sweet, but Eleanor felt the weight of her years. Her hands trembled more now, and she tired faster. She confided in Clara one night, her voice low. "What if I can't keep this up?" Clara took her hand, her grip firm. "You've built something bigger than you, Ellie. It'll carry on, with or without you, but we're keeping you around a while longer." They laughed, and Eleanor felt lighter, knowing she'd created a legacy that could endure. Clara and Harold's wedding was the highlight of the season. Eleanor officiated in the garden, now dusted with snow, her words weaving their love story into the homes. Margaret, Thomas, and Lila stood in the front row, their faces soft with pride. As Clara tossed her bouquet, it landed in Mia's hands, and the crowd cheered. Eleanor caught Margaret's eye, and for a moment, they shared a look of understanding, no words needed. As the year ended, Eleanor sat in her office, the guidebook draft open before her. She'd done what she set out to do, turned a place of endings into one of beginnings. Her children were back in her life, not as caretakers, but as partners. The residents were her family, the home her heart. She knew challenges would come, new laws, new rivals, but she was ready. Sunset Pines was more than a building. It was proof that no one, no matter their age, was ever truly done. Spring returned to Sunset Pines, breathing life into the garden where Eleanor's roses bloomed brighter than ever. The home was a living testament to her vision: residents thriving, families visiting freely, volunteers weaving through like threads in a tapestry. Eleanor, now 79, moved a little slower, but her spirit burned fierce. The guidebook was nearly complete, its pages filled with stories of Sunset Pines and a blueprint for others to follow. She dreamed of a world where no one was discarded, where age was a chapter, not an ending. Her children were now integral to the home's rhythm. Margaret managed its finances with a quiet pride. Her once distant demeanor softened by purpose. Thomas and his kids built a gazebo in the garden, a gift for Clara and Harold's first anniversary. Lila's podcast had caught the attention of a publisher, who offered to turn it into a book of resident stories. Eleanor watched them work together, their laughter mingling with the residents, and felt a peace she hadn't known in years. They'd finally seen her not as a burden, but as a force. The advisory board grew bolder, launching a training program for other nursing homes. Rachel led it, her confidence blooming under Eleanor's mentorship. Clara and Harold, now married, co-chaired the entertainment committee, their love a quiet inspiration. Mia, off to college soon, returned to paint a new Murala sunrise over Sunset Pines, symbolizing hope. "This place changed me," she told Eleanor, her eyes bright. "You changed me." Eleanor hugged her, her heart full, knowing she'd given as much as she'd received. But the world outside wasn't always kind. A new corporate chain circled, offering partnerships that felt more like takeovers. Eleanor met their executives, her gray eyes sharp. "Sunset Pines isn't for sale," she said, her voice steel. "It's a home, not a commodity." They backed off, but she knew they'd return. She trained Rachel and the board to anticipate these battles, ensuring the home's values would outlast her. "It's not about me," she told them. "It's about what we've built together." One quiet evening, Eleanor gathered the residents for a special memory circle. She shared her story one last time, not just the purchase of Sunset Pines, but her life, the loss of her husband, the struggle to raise her children, the fire that drove her to reclaim her place. "I was put here to fade," she said, her voice steady. "But I chose to shine. And so can you." The room was silent, then erupted in applause. Clara wiped tears. Harold squeezed her hand, and Eleanor felt the weight of their love. The next day, Margaret, Thomas, and Lila surprised her with a family dinner in the garden. They'd cooked her favorite meal, roast chicken and apple pie, using recipes she'd taught them decades ago. As they ate under the gazebo, Margaret raised a glass. "To Mom," she said, "who showed us what strength really means." Thomas and Lila echoed the toast, their eyes warm. Eleanor smiled, her heart full. "To family," she said, "the one we're born with, and the one we make." As the sun set, casting gold over the garden, Eleanor looked at the faces around her children, her friends, her community. She'd turned a nursing home into a home, a place of endings into one of beginnings. The guidebook would carry her vision forward. Rachel would lead with her heart, and the residents would keep telling their stories. Eleanor knew her time wasn't endless, but her legacy was. She'd fought for respect, for dignity, for love, and she'd won. The next morning, she walked through the garden, her roses in full bloom. Clara and Harold waved from a bench. Mia's mural glowed in the distance, and the sound of laughter drifted from the lobby. Eleanor paused, breathing in the moment. She'd been put here to disappear, but instead, she'd built a world. And as she stood among her roses, she knew she'd never fade, not in the hearts of those she'd touched, not in the home she'd made, not in the stories she'd written with every defiant, joyful step.